So imagine that you're a 24-year-old guy, you're going on a date, you've gone to dinner, you had a couple of drinks, you're walking with your potential date, potential long-term date to her apartment. You walk up the steps, and as you lean to kiss her, hoping for a passionate goodnight kiss, you tell her, interestingly, I spent $124 on the date so far. How will that date work? I mean, would you actually get the goodnight passionate kiss? I'm not proposing this experiment, and I'm not saying that you should try it. I think it's enough to think about it and to probably realize that this is not going to work very well. And it's kind of interesting to ask why. Why will it not work very well? After all, everybody knows what the prices are on the menu and how much the drinks are. So you've said something that had no informational benefit. You didn't say anything new, but you actually have said something. Before that, you were on a date. Now you're kind of in a prostitution exchange. Money for sex. And it's not by providing any information. It's just by mentioning money. Or think about another example. Imagine I invited you for dinner at my house. And you came to dinner and you were going to spend $40 on a bottle of wine. But you don't know what wine I would like. Red, white, rosé. So you say to yourself that you might spend $40 on a bottle of wine, but I might be able to buy wine that I like even more for $20. So you come to my house and you say, Dan, thanks a lot for inviting me for dinner, but not knowing what wine you really like and worrying that I'll waste money on wine you don't like so much, here is $30. Go ahead and buy yourself the best wine that you can with $30. This way, presumably, you would save some money and I would get better wine. Is that a good strategy? Economically, yes, but would it in any way help our friendship? Not so much. Now you can see all kinds of examples in which adding money to the equation actually make things worse. George Bernard Shaw has this joke where he says he goes to a woman and he says, Madam, would you sleep with me for money? And the woman looks at him and says, of course not. What do you think? I'm a prostitute? He looks at her again and he says, what about for $1 million? She said, oh, you know what? For $1 million, I'll sleep with you. Then he comes back. He said, okay, now that we've established you're a prostitute, let's renegotiate the price. Now, here's one more example. Imagine that my car broke and I needed somebody to help me change the tire. And I came to you and I said, look, would you please help me change the tire on my car? Ask yourself, how likely would you be to help me? What if instead I came to you and I say, I need help changing the tire on my car. Would you please help me? I'll give you $3 for it. What would you say now? Would you be more likely to do it or less likely to do it? Well, here is what would happen. Now you could probably not tell yourself that you're doing something for the goodness of mankind or to help me. Instead, you would do it as a job. You would not be able to say, gee, I get to help Dan to change the tire on his car, plus I get $3. These two forces would not add, they will substitute each other. And now you would say, oh, $3. I don't work for $3. Give me $150, we can talk. But for $3, I don't work. And the idea is that once that financial motivation comes in, the social motivation, feeling good about yourself, good about your action, actually goes away. The basic idea here is that we live on a continuum. There are things that are in the financial domain, which we call market norms, where you pay people for their work. Maybe if you work for me, helping me, I don't know, cut the lawn in my house. I don't actually have a lawn, but if I had one, I could create a contract with you of how much do you get paid for a piece of grass or per hour or per square inch or something like that. That's on one hand. On the other hand, we have marriage or long-term relationship where we don't have these exact trade-offs. And the interesting thing is that we almost never live in the world that is purely money norms. We always live somewhere in the middle. There are very few jobs that you can write a very specific contract for how they would play out. So most things are in the middle, somewhere between those two. And the interesting thing is that once you add financial incentives to the mix, you actually can make things worse off. Like the example of adding $3 to get you to help me change the tire on my car. So let me tell you about a couple of experiments we've done on this. We ask people to do all kinds of things, to help us lift a sofa, to do some boring things on a computer, and they all look the same in terms of results. When we pay people nothing, they work hard and they're very eager to help. We add a small amount of money to the mix, and willingness to work goes down dramatically. We add a large amount of money to the mix, willingness to help goes up again. Much like in the tire example. Would you help me for free? Most likely yes. Would you help me for $3? Most likely no. Would you help me for $300? Most likely yes. So the interesting thing is that the $3, the small amount of money that comes in, actually hurts rather than help. And the next thing we asked is, what about gifts? Right? As we said, when we go to people's homes for dinners, we don't give them money. We give them something that is obscuring the money. We can give them a gift, like a bottle of wine or chocolate or something else. What happens when we give people gifts? So what would happen if I asked you to help me change a tire on my car for nothing, for a small gift, or for a large gift? Would the small gift work like money, where people would be offended or not? People are not offended. The moment you give gifts, you stay in the social domain and not in the market domain, and everything looks better. And then the next question was, what if we gave people gifts, but we told them how much it cost us? Here's a 10-cent chocolate bar. Here's a $5 chocolate box. What would happen when you give a gift, like when you come and you give the wine, but you tell the person, thank you so much for inviting us, here's a $30 bottle of wine. What happens when the money becomes central to the transaction? Do people care about what you gave them or what you got them to pay attention to? Turns out it's what you got them to pay attention to. You give people a gift, but you tell them how much it cost, it backfires again. People are reducing their willingness to help. Now, lots of countries, there are all kinds of habits about when do you give gifts and when do you give money. And particularly for weddings and sometimes birthdays, it's acceptable to give money. And money is, of course, efficient. It's a better gift from an efficiency perspective. If you come to my house, by the way, for dinner, giving me money is also more efficient. But if you go to somebody's wedding, it's incredibly efficient to give the young couple a check and let them buy what they want. Now, it's not that money is not efficient. It's that money is not helping nourish the relationship. In the same way that if you came to my house and gave me a check instead of a bottle of wine, if you go to somebody's wedding and you give them a check instead of giving them a gift, you're not helping your relationship. You will not become better friends tomorrow. Now, if you think about it, it's really a continuum. There's cash and checks. There are gift certificates. There are registry that people tell you what they want in advance. All of those are more efficient than giving your own gift of what you think. But as the efficiency grows up, money is more efficient than gift certificates. Gift certificates are more efficient than registries, or maybe the other way around. But so maybe it's money, registry, gift certificates, and real gifts. As you think about the efficiency goes down, but the social value of these things is going up. So we have to think about that as well. And how much of the gift is really for the person, how much of the gift is because of what you want them to have, and maybe then cash is ideal, and how much of it is to nourish the relationship. By the way, the same thing also happens in the workplace. Imagine you worked for me. And imagine I told you, look, I can do one of two things. I can give you $1,000 in cash, or I can send you to a weekend to the beach. Now, you might look at it and you would say, well, give me the cash. I can maybe go to a cheaper hotel on the beach and get some new gadget. So from your perspective, the cash would probably be more efficient. But imagine the following question. How would it work if a week from now, after giving you the cash, I asked you to come late to the office? I asked you to come on the weekend, I asked you to stay late, I asked you to do some extra work. And how would it work if I gave you the gift? Without asking you, I gave you the gift rather than the cash. What the results basically show is that if you got the cash, you have not built any social capital. So if the workplace all of a sudden asks you to stay another weekend at work or late at night or so on, you basically would say, and how much would you pay me for that? But if the workplace gave you a gift, you all of a sudden moved a little bit in the social realm. Now it's a bit more like marriage than work for money. You feel more obligated, and the give and take between the two of you is increasing to a higher degree, you'll be willing to do more things from them. So the idea here is that there is these financial norms and there are social norms, and as we move around them, we get to sacrifice more, we get to give more, but we also get to get more. And as you move closer to a social relationship, there's much more give and take, and it's much less precise. Sometimes I give you a gift, sometimes I expect something from you. It's not exactly bean counting. Now, I need to give as well. I can't just expect that, right? It's not just something that happens, but there is some exchange. This, I think, is also where social benefits in companies fit in, right? I pay for your health care, I give you a gym, I get you lunch. All of those things are not about the financial transactions. They're about, look, I really care about you, and we're going to have some reciprocation in this more social domain. Now, imagine that you're in this range somewhere, and then at some point you switch to the financial domain. You move into the direction of the market norms. What would happen? And here's a beautiful experiment, set of experiments by Uri Gnisi and Aldo Ruotticini. And they took this daycare center, and in a daycare center, sometimes the parents were late. And when the parents were late, what usually happens? The school teacher looks at her watch, she looks at the parents, she looks at her watch, she makes sure they realize that she is watching them and noting that they're late. They feel guilty, they apologize, and they take their kid and they try to work better. But under Uri and Aldo's supervision, this daycare center basically introduced a fine. If the parents were late, they would have to pay a fine. Now, if the fine was $1,000, the parents probably pulled the kids out and moved to a different daycare. But the fine was a few dollars. Now, what happens now? Imagine you're a parent. You're there in the office, you're working, there's an important task, you look at the watch and you realize you have to leave now. But now there's a fine. What do you say? You can say, oh, at this cost, I have something much more important. The kindergarten can keep my kids for a few more hours, maybe until 7 in the evening. I have more important things here to do. And what happened? Exactly that. All of a sudden, parents were more late. Now, here's what happened. They kept running this event. They kept on running it, and people became later and later and later because now there was no guilt. It was a cost. Is it worth it or is it not? And then at some point, they canceled, after a few weeks, they canceled the fine and they went back to the previous system. Now, can you go back? After you move to a market norms, something that people just do the cost and benefit analysis, can you introduce guilt all of a sudden? The answer is not for a while. Probably not until the next school year. Now, parents were more late. Why? Because you took guilt away, and then you took the fine away, and now there were just no perceived consequences for being late. So the point here is that once we moved to market norms, it's really hard to recover from that. And here's another example to think about it. Imagine that you had two credit card companies. And one credit card company told you, you know what, we're your friends and we're helping you out, and they send you a cookie, or they gave you a mug, or they gave you some gifts. And another one said, we are just a credit card company, it's just business. Okay. And then one day you were late paying your credit card bill. And they both gave you a hefty fine, which is what credit card companies do. And you call them up and you say, I'm really sorry, I was late, my daughter was sick, I got late into the post office, could you please forgive this fine? And they both said no. How would you react to both of those? The first one had a social relationship with you, or at least they claimed they had a social relationship with you. But if now they say no, you would basically get incredibly pissed off, and you would most likely cancel your credit card. Because you had a relationship that was supposed to be a social relationship. But now they tell you never had a social relationship. They don't really understand you. They're not giving you a discount. They don't willing to accept your challenges. The other company, if they said no, you don't get to be upset. They never promised you anything. It was just business. There are strict rules. Here it is. So what happened? The second company people are not upset with. So when we think about it, where do we want to be in the range between market norms and social norms? As we move as a company toward the social norms, we can expect more from people, to forgive us more from time to time, to be willing to accept, to do extra things, more variance, less bin counting. But it also has a cost. it means that we need to actually be on the other side. We need to help. We need to be there when something breaks. So we are not just expecting social norms, we're also giving social norms. So how do we think about this whole notion of market norms versus social norms? In economics, there's a general way to describe contracts. And we think of them as complete contracts and incomplete contracts. And complete contracts are things that we can specify exactly what you would do and what you would get. And the reality is that we try to make contracts with people always complete, exactly about what will happen. But the reality is that it's incredibly difficult to write complete contracts. So now the question is, what is it better? To write partially complete contract or to try and write incomplete contracts? Contracts are general and misspecified. Something like a marriage. You don't sit there and write the whole contract of what you will do and what they will do. You basically say, we will take care of each other. We will try to make it so that in the long term things would work out. Sometimes you would do more, sometimes I will do more. I will not sure what the circumstances of our lives will be, but we will adjust and change accordingly. And the idea is that I think we're thriving too much for the complete contracts. Because as we try to write everything in the contract, the things that govern that contract, the social norm above it, basically go away. If I write a specific contract with you, if something new comes on something different, you're going to adhere to the letter of the law and not to the spirit of the law. But as we move to more general contracts, with handshakes and general agreement and less specific things, we basically agree to adhere to the spirit of the law and not to the letter of the law, and sometimes it is much better. Now, I think it's actually quite a shame that we're taking all of these general contracts and try to make them more specific, because we can't make them really specific enough, and we're doing those, we're actually killing them. And I'll give you kind of one example that has been, I think resonates with me a lot. Imagine a janitor in a hospital. And imagine that this janitor has a very specific rule about what they're supposed to do. Pick the trash and mop and do some things. What happened if one day a patient is falling on the ground from their bed, or somebody else needs help in finding out their relatives? Barry Schwartz gives this example, and he said, of course you would not want this individual to adhere to the letter of the law. You would want them to adhere to the spirit of the law. But what happens if you get this person to have a very, very detailed job description? Are you basically losing the potential that he would go beyond his job? By restricting the job and making it incredibly specific, are you focusing on doing only what's there and not what's really important? So I think the interesting question is, what kind of contracts do we want? And what kind of contracts would get people to be happier and more motivated and be willing to do more, both in the professional domain and in the private domain? And as a last story on this, there was a woman who put an ad on Craigslist, and she said she's beautiful and qualified and wonderful in all kinds of ways. And she usually sees very beautiful women like her dating men who make at least $500,000 a year. This was in New York City before the financial crisis. So she said, look, I'm as beautiful as these women who are dating men who make $500,000 a year or more, but I personally have been stuck. I got into the $250,000 barrier. I've not been able to break that barrier. I can't date men. I can't seem to find men who are making more than that. And she asked for advice and suggestions of how to go about it. Now, the reality is that it's true. Beautiful women marry wealthier guys. That's just kind of a realization of the market. But she said it in a very explicit way. And you can ask yourself, what does it do to you if the contract is so explicit? I'm beautiful, I'm getting money. It kind of makes the whole thing dirty. Imagine you made the contract. Imagine you made enough money to satisfy her, and she was beautiful enough in your mind, and you got together. How would this relationship look like? What would happen on the first night? She doesn't want to have sex, or doesn't want to be a good partner, right? It's a really strange transaction of saying beauty for money. And indeed, one guy wrote her back, and he said, look, I'm wealthy enough. I make more than the required amount, and you seem very beautiful, and I think this is a reasonable deal. But, he said, my assets, which is money, is likely to appreciate over time. And your assets, which is beauty, is likely to depreciate over time. And under those conditions, he said, I prefer to lease than to buy. And you can see how putting out an offer that has a social component of living together, but putting it in terms of market norms, actually invites a very different way of thinking about the relation and think about her, and it's very unlikely to work out. So think about your relationships, think about where they lie on this range from market norms to social norms, and where would they be ideally, both social relationship, business relationships, and so on.